Last month was a great month in media for me, which meant lots of time to spend in my reading journal. In this video, I'm going to take you through all of the books I read, movies I watched, anything like that, give you my general thoughts on how I found them, and avoid spoilers wherever possible. This video is fully timestamped though, so if there are any books or other pieces of media that you really want to avoid spoilers from, feel free to jump around at your leisure. The first book that I finished in March though was Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky. This one was actually a reread for me, so going in I kind of knew that I was going to enjoy it, but I thought it would just be a good opportunity to get a refresher on some of the concepts talked about in the book. If you haven't heard me talk about this book before, then you might be new to the channel, so hi, such a pleasure to have you here. I'm Jess, but Make Time is hands down my favorite productivity self-help book. As the second part of the title suggests, this is about how to focus on what matters every day, and it effectively talks about a bunch of different little tactics that you can employ to make time in your day for the things that matter, how to focus during that time to make sure that you get the stuff done that you want to, and also how to manage your energy in a way that is constructive for getting things done. My favorite part about this book is just how actionable it is though, and it also doesn't feel too prescriptive. It gives you a lot of different ideas, and it's effectively like a pick and choose model. I in particular like the sections in the book where, because we have two authors, they talk about a difference in opinion when it comes to a certain thing. For instance, they talk about carving out time either in the morning or the evening to do the thing that matters most to you. One author very much thinks of himself as more of a night owl, where the other one is an early bird, so they present different options for a similar kind of thing. Another thing that I very much like about this book is that it cuts out a lot of the fluff. It doesn't take a very long time to read. In fact, the first time I read it in pretty much one day because I was running late for our book club. But I also very much appreciated, after having read it and doing the book club meeting, how many people who had joined in for the read that month just really enjoyed it. As said, it is my favorite productivity self-help book, so I might be just like a little bit biased, but if you're looking for ways to better manage your time and get things done with the time you have, then it is definitely worth a read. In terms of the collage for this one, I decided to go with blue, kind of to mimic the blue highlight that's on the front of the book, and also because it tied in with the other two collages we already had on the layout. I do find that the collage work is always a little bit more simple when it comes to non-fiction books, because I'm not necessarily trying to pick out decorative pieces that relate to any kind of plot point. Unsurprisingly, given the fact that it was a reread, this one was a 5-star book for me. I typically don't reread things unless I have rated them highly, but it is always nice to see that my initial rating of the book held this time. At the bottom of the layout though, the next piece of media that I'm collaging for is a movie, and this one was Mickey 17. Now, I don't typically like going to the cinema because oftentimes I feel like I could just get better popcorn at home, and I know that the seats won't be sticky and there won't be other kind of like patrons who maybe don't take the whole be quiet in the cinema rule quite as seriously. It also means that I can pause if I need to go to the bathroom or things like that. Can't really do that at the cinema. But because my wedding ring had come in for collection and it was at a mall that I don't typically go to because it's a little further afield, I figured it was a good opportunity to turn it into a date night with Vogel. He, on the other hand, very much does enjoy going to the cinema, so I put it on him to find a movie that we could go and see together to make the outing a little bit more memorable. This one is a sci-fi comedy movie, and typically speaking, I don't consider sci-fi movies to really be my preferred genre, but that being said, I really enjoyed this one. I don't think I've ever seen Robert Pattinson do this type of accent before, so it was a little bit interesting when the movie started up and hearing his voice and being like, wait, seriously, that voice for this guy? But the general idea is that our main character Mickey and his supposed best friend are trying to escape a murderous loan shark, and to do that they decide to get off planet. To do this, they aim to join a spaceship crew who are heading to colonize a new planet, and through feeling not so sure about his abilities to actually get a role on this spaceship, given that there seems to be quite a lot of people who are applying to be on board, Mickey decides to sign up for a role that pretty much guarantees him a spot, but he should probably have read the fine print. This role is called an expendable, and it's effectively a job that has been outlawed on Earth, but because laws work a little bit differently off-planet, it means that job can still be used. The idea with an expendable though is that they will be taking on lethal tasks as a way to kind of like advance science. As part of this, our main character Mickey is cloned after each death and his memories are restored. And so given that the movie is called Mickey 17, we start off with the 17th version of Mickey. In terms of where we are at the start of the story, they've gotten to the planet they're trying to colonize, finding it to be a somewhat hostile environment in the sense that it is very icy, very cold, and there are some native inhabitants which they have deemed to be hostile. But despite the fact that sci-fi usually isn't my kind of thing, I think that the comedy element really helped it along. I found that the comedy wasn't anything like side-splitting funny, but I did appreciate some of the parallels that certain characters had with real-world figures, in particular the character played by Mark Ruffalo, who I didn't realize was in the film until I sat down in the cinema and saw him on the screen. I really like Mark Ruffalo. I think he's pretty good in most things he's done, or at least I haven't seen him in anything where I was like, poor choice. I ended up giving this one a 3.5 star because it was an enjoyable watch. I'm not sad that I watched it, but it's probably not one that I'm gonna feel compelled to watch again. But one of the biggest measures for me when it comes to seeing a movie at the cinema is whether I feel like I wasted my money, and I don't think I did in this case. It was a really nice time out with Vogel, we had a good evening, and I think that he made a good choice in terms of what we went to see. In terms of decoration for this one, I wanted to keep it fairly minimal so that I could maximize my writing space. So we just have a couple pieces of washi tape and then the moon in the background. The quote that we have in the bottom corner is, "What does it feel like to die?" Which is something that is asked of our character repeatedly because, you know, it's probably one of the only people you could ask that question of. And given the fact that we're on Mickey 17, he's gone through it a couple of times. As can be expected though, it's not necessarily a question he likes very much. Once that one was written up though, then it was time to flip on over to the next spread, and this one is going to have not one book, or two, but actually a series of books. Rather than doing a separate section for each of them, I figured it just made more sense to put them all on the same layout, and that's because all of these books are from the Lore Olympus series. I don't read a lot of graphic novels. This is one of the first ones that I got into, mainly because we had it for book club, and the first year we did book club, or at least we had volume 1 because, you know, we only pick one book for the month in book club. But over the course of the month, I read volumes 1 through 6. I was planning on reading volume 7, and I do actually end up putting it onto this layout, but given the timing, I'm gonna end up picking that one up in April. This series is a retelling of Greek mythology, with the main focus being the relationship between Hades and Persephone. Now, I'm not very savvy on my understanding of Greek mythology. I haven't really experienced a lot of it, and certainly not from any kind of original sources. So really, most of my familiarity with Greek mythology comes from this and the Disney Hercules movie. I know that some critiques online about the Lore Olympus series talk about how it's diverged too far away from the original, but as someone who's just a sucker for a love story, I don't really care, to be completely honest. I think that this story is so fun. I love that Persephone uses a bullet journal. I'm just like, oh my gosh, a girl after my own heart. She is definitely a naive character, but I think we see her develop nicely throughout the story into a stronger, more confident, more competent young woman. At the start of the story though, we have 19-year-old Persephone and, I don't know, 500-year-old Hades, who spy each other at a party, or at least Hades spies Persephone, and then he goes and makes the foolish comment of comparing her beauty to that of Aphrodite's. Of course, Aphrodite overhears this and decides that she's going to take that frustration out on Persephone, who had literally nothing to do with Hades' comments. Having just read Psyche and Eros in February, this felt like a very kind of common theme for Aphrodite. Again, I do not know the source material very well, but this feels like something that's kind of integral to her character. Anytime somebody compares another person or God's beauty to that of Aphrodite, rather than going to the person who made the comparison, she goes and acts out on the person who the comment was made about. It's a very interesting strategy. This is a series where it probably pays to look over the trigger warnings if there's particular content that you don't want to read in your books. I'm usually pretty okay with those kind of things, and because, at least up to the point where I'm at now, everything's a reread, I knew what to expect going in. One of the things that I also quite enjoy about the Greek mythology kind of retellings is that I'm not very good at saying their names aloud, because this is a graphic novel series. It's not really the kind of one you do in audiobook form. I actually don't even know if there is an audiobook of Lore Olympus, but in trying to talk to some of my friends about the series and certain characters, there have certainly been some moments where they genuinely did not know who I was talking about. In particular, Hecate, who I was calling Hecate, which effectively just sounds like a variation of effort, but you know, it's cool. I tried. Because I wanted to put all of the book covers on here, but also have space for writing, but also have some space for decoration, I just opted for one large panel of decoration down the right-hand side of the spread. And as per all of my reviews, I used the same lettering style from the title of the book, or the book cover, to do the title of the spread. Sometimes these are really easy to find, and sometimes they definitely are not, and I have to go make them myself, which as we flip over was the case for our next read, which was Caraval. I couldn't find just a simple transparent background PNG of the lettering style anywhere, so I effectively had to take the cover of the book and then invert it and then go and remove everything that wasn't the title. It was a bit of a mission. It definitely took me longer than I probably needed to spend on it, but I'm not mad because I think it looks pretty cool. We'll see that title in a second though, because first I'm going and putting in some decoration and the book cover itself. Along with Olympus, Caraval was on my list of 25 books for 2025, where I effectively pre-picked 25 books in particular that I wanted to read across the year. It actually felt good to make some progress on that list, because prior to this, the only ones I'd knocked off were Inner Demons by Sarah Cannon and Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. Given that there are 25 books on that list, I should be averaging about 2 a month, so that I can get through the whole thing by the end of the year. And come the end of March, I'm only sitting on 4 read, so I have a little bit of catching up to do. Caraval though has very fantastical and fairy tale kind of vibes, and it's essentially a prequel to the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, though it was published first. That's actually why we were reading Caraval at this point in the year. I read it as a buddy read with my friend Rachel, and she needed it for her Aurelian prompt, or the Magical Readathon, specifically having to read an author's first published book, of which this is Stephanie Garber's. Now, given that it was her first book, and I have already read the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, you can definitely see that her writing style has, I wouldn't necessarily say like improved over time, because that makes this sound like a bad book, but there have been changes. I did still enjoy this book, but I found it harder to get into compared to Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is, funnily enough, the first book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. That being said though, once the story started to ramp up towards the kind of middle of the book, maybe like the last third, I was very much captivated and I just needed to know where the story was going. And I swear, this book, at the end of it, it just made me feel so gaslit. I'm like, what is going on? Who can we trust? Is this character actually dead? Like, what is going on? How did this person get here? Why are they with this other person? So it is certainly a series that I'm going to be continuing with, because I am definitely intrigued now. But getting to that point took a while longer compared to the Once Upon a Broken Heart book. I think that is something that I've heard people say commonly about the Caraval series versus Once Upon a Broken Heart, and I think it possibly would have been nice to read this one first so I didn't have the comparison point, but I'm also not mad about it. I really loved the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, so I trust Stephanie Garber to take me in the right direction. In terms of what the story is actually about though, we have 2 sisters, Scarlett and Donatella, with Scarlett being the person we're mainly focusing on. After hearing stories about Caraval from her grandmother, she is very much intrigued with the idea of going, and ends up writing letters to the leader of Caraval pretty much every year to request tickets to go. Eventually she figures that her dreams of seeing Caraval are pretty much not gonna happen. She writes a final letter to the organizer, effectively saying, I'm coming up to this arranged marriage now, so I guess my time to go to Caraval is kinda over, and lo and behold, actually gets a response inviting her with 3 tickets. Every year at Caraval, there is a fantastical game for attendees to enjoy, and so as can be expected, Scarlett and her sister both end up going, and we follow Scarlett as she tries to win this game. One of the running themes in the book is the idea that the performers of Caraval want you to have fun, they want you to get immersed in the world, but you should beware of getting swept too far away. And I felt that in that last third of the book, it was very much like, has she gotten too swept away? Who do we trust? What's going on? As said, it did take me a second to get to that point and really be invested in the story, but I did very much enjoy it, and I'll probably read the rest of the series. I ended up giving this one 4 stars out of 5, which is the same rating that I gave Once Upon a Broken Heart, and I ended up rating the other 2 books in that series 5-star, so I'm hoping for good things for the rest of the Caraval series. Moving on to the bottom section of this layout though, another one of my challenges for the year is what some people typically do as 12 books from 12 friends, where they have 12 people they know pick 12 books for them to read across the year. Now, I don't necessarily have 12 people that I trust the book recommendations of, so I decided to do this one a little bit differently and just call my challenge 12 recommendations from friends. As part of this, I got 3 friends and my family members to each give me a recommendation of 1 book, 1 movie, or watchable, and 1 game. The game recommendation that came from Monica was Sims 4, so I decided to undertake playing some of that in March. Now, I have played Sims 4 before, so I kind of knew going in what to expect, and Sims is very much one of those games that I hold big nostalgia for. I remember getting every single expansion pack from the first game. In particular, I loved the Making Magic one. I enjoyed making my little potions, and getting my different ingredients, and trying not to burn my house down because I don't know how to cook. But one of the things that I always found in playing The Sims, outside of the Making Magic stuff, is that I had the most enjoyment in building the house. The character design was kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. And actually playing the game outside of the making magic stuff was also kind of whatever, but getting to design the house, that was always a lot of fun. This time around when I played Sims 4 though, I guess I kind of just ignored that. I was like, oh, you know, I want to get into the game quickly, I want to be able to like level up my character and have her learn skills and all of this kind of thing, so I kind of rushed through character development. Like, I was fine with her, she was a fine character, and then just moved her into a pre-built house and quickly found myself getting kind of bored. I know that some people like to play The Sims and do these kind of like challenges, like the generational challenges or 100 babies challenge or whatever, but I do think that my enjoyment is usually from house building. The issue that I have though is because I'm so, I don't know, unfamiliar with The Sims 4, I don't really know how to effectively build a house in that. The kind of interface has changed a little bit since Sims 1, so I'm not as familiar with how things work. And while I probably could upskill and learn how to do it, that's not really how I want to spend my leisure time. I'm kind of thinking that The Sims, in particular Sims 4, might be something that I just put to bed as enjoyed previously, and now I'm looking for something a little bit different. It was a nice way to spend an evening, I just don't think I'm going to be spending any more evenings on it. In terms of decoration for this one, I wasn't really too sure what to go with, so I ended up using 2 washi tapes, one of them just being a simple grid, and one of them being a kind of like cozy self-care biscuits and tea kind of vibe. I didn't want it to be too in-your-face rainbow with all of the different colors on the cover of the game, though I suppose to decorate I probably could have gone and taken a screenshot of my character and stuck her in, but I'm fine with how it turned out. On the right hand side of the layout though, this is where we're going to be using the full page for our March book club read, which was How to Keep House While Drowning by Casey Davis. The read theme for the month was an area you'd like to develop in, and this one was selected by our members through a voting poll. Now the more I think about this book, the more I feel like I should have given it a higher rating, but one of the best things I found about it was just how many people in the book club really appreciated it. I very much appreciated the kind of like self-kindness and gentle approach to keeping house that our author talks about. In particular, reframing the idea of household work as care tasks, because that's effectively what it is. It's just a type of self-care. I really enjoyed in the book club meeting people sharing about how the book had resonated with them, how it made them feel seen and validated. I do feel that the target audience for this book is very much people who are really struggling when it comes to keeping on top of household tasks and how to approach different areas of your home and self and caring for both of those. But some of my key takeaways were the idea of cleaning and tidying for a 3-tiered system, those being firstly health and safety, second comfort, and third happiness. And I did like that in the back of the book, in the appendix, we got examples of what that would look like in different spaces. And I also appreciated the running theme through the book that things don't have to be done perfectly for that process to have value. I think part of the reason that I ended up giving it a 3.5 star out of 5 is probably because the information wasn't necessarily new to me. These are actually some things that I've previously talked about in my newsletter or through my video content, so it wasn't necessarily bringing a whole bunch of new information to the table, but I haven't seen it presented with quite such a focus on the self-care element. As mentioned though, the best part about this book was just hearing about how it resonated with other people and made them feel validated. So if you're finding that keeping on top of your household work feels like you're literally drowning, then this book is certainly worth a read. It is a nice short one, another book that could probably be read in just a day, but in terms of the decorative elements on this layout, I decided to lean into the waves that we have on the front cover, using a PET tape that has these absolutely gorgeous wave designs. I'm definitely going to end up using them in my journal at some point, like not my reading journal, my everyday journal. I love the punchiness of the color, I love the variation in the blues, I also think that the gilding is really nice because it's only subtle, and it was nice to have something a little more decorative for a non-fiction read, because as I mentioned before, it often feels a little bit strange to put a whole bunch of like pictorial elements and such on a layout for a non-fiction book when they're not related to any kind of like plot points or anything like that. Flipping over and just ignoring the fact that my camera focus chose violence, on this spread we're going to be using the full left-hand page for a game that I played in March, and that one is Life is Strange Double Exposure. Vogel got this one for my birthday because he knew how much I loved the first Life is Strange game, and and also the third one. The second one was, in my opinion, and Vogel's opinion, not the greatest. But the general premise in the series is that we're following characters that have some kind of superpower. Often they have only just discovered that they have said superpower, so they have to figure out how to use it, and usually use it to solve some kind of mystery. The first Life is Strange game is definitely on my top 5 favorite games of all time list. I just love the concept and the gameplay style and the story of it. It was excellent. And in terms of the series as a whole, while the first one is definitely still my favorite, Double Exposure was still a good entry. This one in particular was exciting because we see a return of our main character from the first game. In each of the other games so far, we've been playing with a different set of characters, like people we haven't really seen before, so it was nice to get to welcome our original character back. In this game though, she is no longer in the same place she was. In fact, she's been touring around, experiencing different places, making memories, and for this game she's settled down at a college where she has a 1-year position as a photography teacher. It did take me a second to figure out what her relationship was to the college or university. I don't think that was made super clear in the first chapter, but once you figure it out, some of her dialogue makes a little bit more sense. Our main character, Max, hasn't used her powers since the first game and the happenings that came from using her powers, and she's kind of taken to viewing her powers in quite a negative light, just because of the outcome that happened from that first game. What the outcome was very much dependent on the player. There are 2 possible main outcomes that we could have, and in either case we kind of get to see how Max is dealing with the decisions that she made and the outcomes that came from them. In the first game, Max's power that she discovers is time manipulation, and in particular being able to rewind time. One of the cool additions to this, in particular because Max is a photographer or like studying photography, is that if she has a photograph of a particular instance, she can use her power to rewind time to when that photo was taken. This becomes quite helpful as she's trying to solve the mystery of the first game, so jumping back using those snapshots of different times and places. In this game though, because Max hasn't been using that power or developing it, we actually get a different power for her, which was kind of interesting. I think one of the things that made the first game my favorite was the time manipulation power, so being able to have a conversation with someone, and then if it doesn't go your way, reverse time and try again. This was also a way that you could find out information from characters and help to solve the mystery, but in Double Exposure, it seems that we can jump between dimensions. We have 2 dimensions in particular that we're jumping between, one of which the happenings at the end of the first chapter actually happen, and one reality in which they didn't. Again, we have the mystery element. Max is trying to figure out what happened at the end of that first chapter or why it came to pass, and using information gained from both realities to figure this out. One of the reasons that I didn't like the second game in the series is because we didn't stay in one place. We were constantly jumping around, getting introduced to new characters, which meant you didn't really get to form any relationships with anybody, or feel like you were forming relationships with them or deepening those relationships. So I was glad that this game was another in the series that we're kind of based in one spot, even if we're jumping between realities. And I did find the majority of the characters quite likable. I thought that the story was a fairly decent return to the original, while still feeling like its own narrative. If there are any more installments in this series, I will definitely be playing them. I love the gameplay style and I love the story-based elements, so I find these games a lot of fun. In terms of the decorations on this one, I went with some wintry inspired elements, so a PET tape running along the bottom with a winterscape, and then some winter inspired botanical stickers. All of those and a bunch of the other materials in our setup coming from Journal Say. Any of the materials I've used I have aimed to link in the description box, so if there's anything in particular that catches your eye, be sure to check down there or just ask me about it in the comments. Most of them did come from Journal Say though. Moving on to the top of the right hand page though, we have a movie that I have been meaning to watch for a while, and that is the 2023 version of The Little Mermaid. I've been slowly working my way through the Disney live action remakes, and I think that Beauty and the Beast is still my favorite, but Beauty and the Beast is probably also my favorite Disney cartoon, so that might be kind of influencing my thoughts. I think that in terms of casting, picking Melissa McCarthy for Ursula was excellent. I think she did a great job. I appreciated how she kind of like took on the voice of the original really well, and she was just a lot of fun. In terms of our other characters though, I didn't so much like the changes they made to Scuttle. I liked that Scuttle was still a kind of dumb bird, but I did prefer Scuttle as a seagull. I I mean, it makes sense having a bird that can go underwater, at least temporarily, given that a good chunk of the movie is set underwater. And while I like that they tried to have Eric have a little bit more of a character behind him, his musical piece in the movie felt like a bit much. The biggest beef that I had with the movie though was definitely the costuming, because one of the things that I feel at least is iconic about Ariel is her very vibrant red hair. And while they did go with a kind of more realistic take on red hair, making it a lot more orange toned in this movie, I think I really missed just having the very punchy, vibrant red. Another thing that was very much iconic was Ariel's sparkly dress when she gets out of the water at the end of the movie, and we didn't get the sparkly dress, and I was devastated. I was sitting there watching it with Rachel and I'm like, oh, I'm really excited to see what they did for her sparkly dress. And Rachel, having already seen it, she's like, yeah, the sparkly dress. Oh. Devastated, absolutely devastated. I also did miss that we didn't have Chef Louis in this version, and I also think that some of the musical numbers were just better in the original, but that also could be because there's the nostalgia point as well. Overall, I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 star, and I thought that our weird mermaid sticker here with this kind of like split in her tail fit well with my thoughts around the costuming being not quite right. I figured there was probably not going to be another opportunity to use this sticker because it does look a little bit strange, but I do at least think the coloration of the sticker is nice, even if it isn't necessarily a perfect match for what I would envision for Ariel. The next one we have is for a book I started reading in March but haven't quite finished yet, and that is Sprint by Jake Knapp, John Zaratsky, and Brandon Coates. Given how much I love Make Time, I figured that this one could also be of interest to me, and I liked the idea of how to solve big problems and test new ideas in just 5 days. The idea of a sprint is to focus on a particular problem or challenge, one that you can brainstorm ideas for, pick one to execute on, make a prototype, and then test it out in the span of a work week. I thought this was pretty cool and maybe something that I could use in my work, which is why I decided to read it. It's been on my list for ages, but in getting into it, I quickly realized that this one probably isn't for me. In particular, this one focuses on businesses where you would have a team of people working on something, with a section at the start of the book talking about how 7 is kind of like a magical number in terms of people in the room when you're doing this sprint process. They talk about how to pick those people, who definitely needs to be there, selecting a facilitator, things like that. And given that I primarily work by myself, I don't really have a team that I would do sprint work with. In terms of the writing style in the book, it is quite similar to Make Time, which I appreciated, but in terms of the content, I don't think I'm the target audience. I might end up finishing it off in April, I'm not really too sure at this stage, but in terms of doing this little review space, I decided to go with a 2.5 star rating, mainly because on my rating scale, 2 stars is this read was it felt like a slog to get me to actually read it, and I wouldn't recommend it. And I don't think I'm necessarily feeling that way about the book, but a 3 star is this was a solid read, don't regret reading it, but it wasn't as impactful or as enjoyable as I'd hoped. At this stage, I'm a little bit lower in enthusiasm for the book than a 3 star would be, so I thought the 2.5 was a reasonable score. Depending on if I continue with the book and how I find the rest of it, I might end up changing this one, but at this stage, 2.5 is where it's at. I kept the decoration on this one very minimal, just using some offcuts that I had from my April setup in my regular journal. But what I also wanted to fill in this wrap-up were my start of month pages, in particular the layout that I had for Realmathon and the reads that I used for that. Now, technically speaking, everything I read and finished in March counted towards Realmathon, but I only ended up leaving myself 6 spaces because I wasn't expecting to read as many books as I did. Rather than going and adding in a tip-in or anything like that to capture the other reads that don't end up on this page, I just decided to capture 6 of them. It at least shows kind of the idea behind the challenge and what I read as part of that, at least 2/3 of it. So for each of the books, I just stuck in a little picture of the cover and then listed out the prompts that I used to either earn my team points or take away points from other teams. For most of the month, I was just adding points to my team because it was easier, especially because there were certain prompts that were really good for earning points that tied to Lore Olympus. One of those prompts in particular was having sibling characters, and given that we have sibling characters throughout the entire of the series, that was a really good way to give 5 points to my team. There were also other ways to earn points outside of just the ones that I've written down here. For instance, the length of the book could give you bonus points. We also had some bonus points based on our team, so 2 potential extra ways to earn points for each team individually. And also any book that had an urban setting would also give you extra points. I did find that a lot of the prompts lent more towards fiction, but I could still include the 2 non-fiction books that I finished in the month as well. For both of those, I found it easier to focus on taking points away from another team, because the prompts just worked better with that, or the combination to get the highest total worked better with taking away points. This was a really fun challenge. It was my first year getting involved, and I don't know if I'll necessarily do it next year, but as far as team-based challenges go, I did have a lot of fun. I find that some team-based challenges, when it comes to readathons, are just a little bit too stressful. Like the way they're structured kind of adds a bit too much pressure to my reading, which isn't necessarily something that I like to do when it comes to these reading challenges, but it did somewhat challenge my belief that I didn't like team-based challenges. I did actually find this one quite fun, so I'm willing to undertake more team-based challenges in future months. As said, I didn't summarize all of the books that had counted towards Realmathon, just the ones that I could fit on the page, and having a good variation in what I had on here. I could have just filled the entire thing with lore Olympus and written out pretty much the same prompts every single time. But closing up our prompt menu and flipping forward, then we have the March recap layout. This is where I like to capture all of the statistics related to the books I read or the media that I consumed throughout the month, for the most part thinking just about the ones I've finished. And the first section is what I call the media breakdown. This is where I write out how many of each media type I consumed. So across the month I read 9 books, watched 2 movies, watched 1 TV show, and played 2 games. When it comes to books, I do very much consider this to be how many books I finished in the month, but when it comes to games and TV shows, I'm not quite as specific about it. The 1 TV show that I watched here is just like 1 season of 1 TV show, and I didn't even finish that season. And then in terms of the games, I played 2 games, but I didn't technically finish either of them. I still intend on playing more Life is Strange, but I don't necessarily intend on playing more of The Sims. The next section to fill in though are my highlights, and these aren't necessarily my favorites from the month, but the ones that felt the most memorable. The ones that I decided to add in here were Lore Olympus, because I read a decent chunk of the series just in March and it was a really fun time. I also included Life is Strange Double Exposure because I finally got around to playing it, Mickey 17 because it was a really great night out with Vogel, we had a lot of fun, and Caraval because it was a buddy read with Rachel that we'd been meaning to do for a while. At the bottom of this page though, this is where I put in any memorable quotes from the things that I read or watched during the month. I still need to do a better job of collecting these throughout the month so I don't have to go and look them up at the end of the month and not necessarily have sourced them from the source material. But the 3 that I went with were defensive tone, slightly flushed, high body temp, you have a crush on Hades. That coming from Eros in Lore Olympus. Another Lore Olympus quote that I included was directed at Zeus, that one being 2 brothers and you still have only child syndrome. And I also wanted to include a quote from our book club book from the month, which would have been part of the highlights because I just really valued how much people found it helpful for them. But the quote that I went with is, "No one ever shamed themselves into better mental health." I thought that was a really good reminder, especially for those of us who tend to be quite hard on ourselves. We have a tendency to strive for perfection in pretty much any endeavor, which can definitely take a toll on us. So I thought that that one was a nice reminder. Moving over to the top of the right hand page though, this is the at a glance section, which is just for a selection of statistics that I like to keep track of. The ones that I have here are average rating, the number of pages read, the number of minutes watched, how many series I read from, and how many standalones. In terms of my average rating, we did pretty good this month, coming in at 4.67, that one being particularly high because of the enjoyment that I have with Lore Olympus and how many individual books I read for that one. In terms of pages, I had 3,229, keeping in mind that a lot of those pages don't have very many words on them because Lore Olympus is a graphic novel series. For minutes, I had 1,046, those coming from the TV show episodes that I watched and also the 2 movies. And then in terms of my reads, I had 2 series that I read from, that being the Caraval series and Lore Olympus, and 2 standalone books, both of those being non-fiction. Getting into one of my favourite parts of this layout though, we have the mini pie graph section, and I do these for formats, genres, and ratings. In terms of my format breakdown, mainly I went with digital reads, which I was kind of surprised at because I had so many that were physical reads this time around, or at least compared to usual, rather than reading Lore Olympus on a digital space, which would be done via webtoons with a whole lot of ad watching. I instead was very kindly allowed by Monica to borrow her copies, getting through 3 of the 4 that I borrowed from her. This still meant that 2/3 of my reads were digital though. In terms of genres, the majority were fantasy, but I did have 2 self-help books this month. And then in terms of ratings, we have a little bit more variation than usual. In both January and February, I only had 3 different ratings, whereas this month I had 4, with most of them being 5 stars, and most of those 5 stars going to the Lore Olympus series. I do think I might go and make the lines on my bar graph just a little bit wider, because I think they look a little bit odd being as narrow as they are, and I could probably add a little bit more decoration next to the at a glance space. But overall, I think that my recap page is looking pretty good. Something that we don't always do in these recaps, but I thought I should probably do while I had it fresh in my mind that I finished 9 books in March, was go back to my 52 in 52, or my bookshelf with 52 books at the start of my journal, and make sure that I had 9 coloured in purple for March. I've been colour coding these based on what month I finished the book in, so you can see I have a decent amount of purple on this shelf. I'm not sure at this stage as to whether I want to write the titles of the books in. Let me know what you think. Should I go and write the titles in, or should I just leave them blank? I'm genuinely not too sure what I want to go with. Flipping through though to have a look at all of the pages for March, I feel it was another successful month in the reading journal. I learnt more about what I do and don't like in there, what I do and don't need. For instance, my spread related to our book club has already been condensed for April because I realistically just don't need that much space. The reading recap layout is still working well for me, and I'm really enjoying doing the collage work. It's just a fun little opportunity to be creative. I had a lot of fun with my media consumption in the month, and I'm looking forward to hopefully another good reading month in April. For that setup, I've gone with more of a kind of autumnal theme, because it's going to be fall where I'm based, or in theory it already is, but the weather isn't playing the game. So if you wanted to see that one and any of the other setups that we have in this reading journal, then the playlist on screen is the next one to check out. That one has all of my setup videos, these reading wrap-ups, and the start of journal setup, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.